Afternoon. He's a Chicago guy, born in Chicago, grew up right here in Melrose Park. He attended Proviso East High School, where he was a standout athlete, particularly in football, basketball, also did a little boxing along the way. And he's a local product right here, Italian-American. A little too young for the Vietnam War, so he really came of age at a time when the United States had gone to an all-voluntary military. So unlike many of the gentlemen here in this room, he didn't have the draft that he had to be concerned with. But in keeping with a family tradition of service to his country, service to his community, and also patriotism that was instilled in him by his father, by his uncles, who were all veterans, he decided to volunteer to serve his country in the United States Army. Now, not only did he volunteer for the Army, but he volunteered for the infantry. And then he volunteered to be a paratrooper, to go airborne. And then he volunteered to have the opportunity to try to become a United States Army Ranger. And I say try to become. For those of you who don't know anything about the Army Rangers, they're some of the most highly trained and elite warriors on the face of the earth. And, you know, really, I rank the U.S. Army Rangers right up there on a par with all the special warfare operators from the other branches of the service, the Marines, the Navy SEALs that most people have heard of, the Air Force Special Ops and PJs. I mean, each one of these branches of the service have their own little area of expertise, but they are truly second to none. And to give you an idea of how selective and how difficult the process is to become a Ranger, most people in the military don't even qualify to try out for these special warfare ops groups, like the Rangers. To give you an idea about the selection process, and our guest this afternoon told me this himself, he said in basic training or boot camp in the Marine Corps, although it might not seem like it, but those drill instructors or those drill sergeants are really there to help you get through boot camp, to help you pass. In fact, they want you to pass and they want you to graduate. Well, with the Ranger course, those instructors are there to wash you out. In fact, they don't care, and again, this is a direct quote from somebody who went through it, they don't care if they have a class of 50 and they fail every one of them. It's the roughest training that the military has to offer, and there's no compromise. If you can't hack it, that's it, you're out. Our guest this afternoon was one of the ones who could hack it. He became a U.S. Army Ranger. He was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, based out of Fort Lewis, Washington. And their motto is, Rangers lead the way. And lead the way is just what he did. He literally was one of the very first Americans to parachute into Panama, boots on the ground, to kick off Operation Just Cause at night under fire. And I believe this was the first combat night jump that U.S. military forces had taken place, had engaged in since the end of World War II. So now we'll let the adventure begin. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you a friend of mine. He's here with us this afternoon. Give him a round of applause. Mr. Sam DiTusa.
Just a little bit about me before the actual adventure begins. I was born in Chicago on Division in Springfield. Lived there till I was 10, 11 years old. Then we were lucky enough to escape out here to Melrose Park and grew up in a great community. Some of my very best friends from the neighborhood in high school, Ronnie Biskin, Tommy Cox, Mike Cardamone, showed up today. Typical fun in Melrose Park. Went to Proviso East, played some football, boxed out of a Fowler Park. The famed Pat Picasso, great boxing coach there. And I had a good upbringing, two great parents. that took care of us. My sister's here with us today, Robin, and we had a great home. Steve elaborated on the fact that I did come from a family. My father had 4 brothers, all 4 of them. It was kind of a parallel to the Sullivan brothers. I know everyone saw the movie about the Sullivans. All 4 of them were sent into the military. They were drafted at the same time. One ended up in the 101st, was in that famous unit when they parachuted, the band of brothers. The other one was in the 82nd and did a combat jump with them. One of the other brothers was an MP in Europe, and the last one chose the best route. He was in the Navy. All of them came home alive, thank God. My father was the youngest. He was not drafted. And when Korea popped up, my grandfather at the time was very ill, and he went down to the draft board and begged them, please, took the other 4, can't you leave my youngest here, no dice. So my dad ended up getting drafted. He went into the Army, the communications guy, and went to Korea, came back. So that was always my interest. I think my first real interest where I knew I want to be not only in the Army, but I want to be in a real elite unit. I was 10 years old. My dad took me by the hand one time. We were living in the city, and he says, come on, we're going to the movies, just me and you, which he did a lot. We didn't have a car. My dad didn't even have a driver's license till he was in his 30s, so we walked everywhere, which, as most, you could do back then. He took me to the Tiffin on North Avenue, and we saw The Green Beret with John Wayne. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that movie. It was a movie John Wayne did. He paid for it himself, and it was a kind of a movie to get people more on the side of the United States and the military guys who were in Vietnam. And I watched that movie, and I watched the segment where they were in airborne school, and I watched it. I said, that's going to be me. My dad just looked at me, shook his head, and said, right. From that point on, I always, in the back of my mind, had a desire to do that. So we'll move ahead. I worked on the loading docks on the south side for 10 years, and at the ripe old age of 27 years old, finally says, okay, it's time. I enlisted in the Army and went in at 28. I was on a delayed entry. I needed 1 more year to secure a 10-year vested pension with the Teamster Union, which was, I thought I could show something for all these years, and signed up at the MEP station, came home, floored my dad. He couldn't believe it. He's like, are you kidding? All my buddies were like, are you nuts? No one does this stuff. And but in the back of my mind, I'd always wanted to do it. It was a dream of mine, and the dream begins later in life. So my dad drives me to the MEP station, drops me off. I end up at Fort Benning for basic training. And I am in the last class. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Fort Benning or trained there, but the famous Harmony Church I was in the last class that did basic training through Harmony Church. Harmony Church is the spot where General Robert E. Lee trained all the Confederate infantry during the Civil War. That's how long that post has been there. And the barracks we were in were the exact same ones that, that they trained in. It was, water running was very sporadic. The walls were paper thin. You froze at night. You sweated bad in the summer. It was a good basic training. And as we stood on the parade ground and graduated basic training, the bulldozers were bulldozing down all our barracks. Because that was the last Harmony Church class, which I was pretty proud to actually have been through. So I go from there to AIT, Advanced Infantry Training. Pretty much the same thing as basic. I mean, all you guys went through this stuff. It was simple. Stayed at Fort Benning. I was getting tired of it. Being a Chicago guy down in Georgia that long was culture shock. Get to appreciate grits and all kinds of things like that. When AIT ended, again, most of the other guys all got to finally head out to their home base where they were going to be stationed, except for the few of us who had signed up to go through airborne training. When I joined the Army, I took the Asvab Test, which everyone's familiar with. If you're not, it's a test you take to get in the military. And I had scored as high as you could score on it, which surprised me. And when I told them I wanted to be a Ranger, they tried for weeks and weeks to discourage me. They said you could take a medical career, you could do something in electronics, you could, you know. I said, no, I just want to be a Ranger. And I want in my contract the opportunity to be a Ranger. So after AIT, they shipped me off, and here I go to Airborne School. And Airborne School, again, I got to experience a lot of the lasts. So we were one of the last classes in Airborne School where you actually still ran in boots. Now they've gone to the running shoes and that. So I do my 3 weeks in Airborne School, get my jumps out of the way. Now for sure I'm like, oh boy, am I going to get out of Fort Benning? No. Most of Airborne School dissipates back to their base, and 28 of us who had opted to try out for the 75th Ranger Regiment are picked up by 2 of the Ranger cadre at Airborne School. And we're all very proud. Airborne Graduation, you stand there and you get to take off your regular Army cap and put on that maroon beret, which signifies you are an airborne paratrooper now. Well, imagine having 2 big hulking Ranger RIs come in, they grabbed the 28 of us, and they said, take those red berets off and throw them in this garbage, and don't ever put them on again. And in front of 150 graduates, they put us down and smoked us for 20 minutes in front of the whole class, doing push-ups, flutter kicks, burpees, up and down, just killing us in front of it, because they wanted everyone else to know what us 28 were now heading off to do. They put us on a bus, they took us to the Ranger compound. At that time was the Ranger selection. It was called RIP, the Ranger Indoctrination Program. The very first night, they gave us our gear, they kept us up till midnight. They let us go into these old beat-up barracks and get some sleep. At midnight, at 1 o'clock, they came in with a grenade simulator, woke us all up, hustled us out onto the parade field. This was first week in February, and It does get cold in Georgia in February. Not quite like us, but it was pretty darn cold. And we did not get to get dressed. The guys who were sleeping naked got out there naked. Guys in their underwear were in their underwear. Whatever you were sleeping in, outside. And they put us in the dying cockroach, which is laying on your back with your legs up off the ground and your hands up off the ground like a cockroach that's dead in your house. They die on their back. And we laid like that, and our first order in that school was, as soon as 2 guys quit, you guys can all get up and go back into the barracks. And we laid like that for an hour and 15 minutes until 2 guys finally quit. And I think what finally convinced the 2 guys to quit, they started soft selling it to us. Come on, you don't want to be a Ranger. This is bull. You know, you don't want to do this. All you got to do is get up, and you get to go in and put your clothes on. We'll take you to the chow hall. You can get breakfast. We'll put you on a plane and send you out to a nice unit where you don't ever have to deal with this again. And it must have appealed to a couple of them. Thankfully jumped up, and they got their 2 washouts the first hour and 15 minutes. The next 3 weeks was nothing but incredibly hard physical and mental tasks. I don't want to tell you even any of the stories. It was 3 weeks of most incredible, can you take it, that I ever imagined. And I will say that I would not have made it, and I remember this guy's name forever, except for a cook. And in the Ranger battalions, even the guys who served us food and were cooks in the chow hall had to be Rangers and Ranger qualified to do that. And the toughest guy in our class of 28, which at the time we graduated was 17, happened to be a cook who was about 26 years old. He'd been in the Army for 6 years. And the very last thing we had to do was on a warm day, beginning of March, we had to do our 12-mile Ruck March / run. We had to do it in Ranger standards, which were 2 hours and 40 minutes, with our ruck and our weapon and all our gear. And for some reason, my body was just beat to Hades by that time. And the very last part, when you had the 12 miles done, you had to walk straight up a hill that seemed like forever. And when you got to the top, there was a finish line and you were done. I got halfway up that hill and I could not move one more step. I was so dehydrated, my legs cramped, my stomach was cramped. I was getting cramps in my neck and throat muscles. I could not step. And Massengale saw me, and he ran back and grabbed me and says, "Come on, man. We're here. Let's do it. All we got to do is do it." And he took me by the arm and escorted me like you'd escort your wife down your wedding aisle, up the hill to the end, and the RIP instructors were up there, and I really thought they were really, really happy and pleased that I made it, because at that time I was 29, and I was older than a lot of the guys there, so I was probably the oldest guy in that class, and they were pretty pleased. So we get up there, take our PCs off, and the proudest point in my Army life for sure was donning the black beret for the first time. We were the only ones in the Army who wore black berets at that time, and it was an honor. I mean, it brought tears to most all of our eyes. I mean, holy cow, we're here. So then we get sent out to our respective battalions. You could either go to 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. They kept me in 3rd in Fort Benning, and I was like, oh no, please, I've been here. So they gave us 5 minutes to switch with anybody. I found a guy who was going to Fort Lewis. I didn't even know where it was. They said it's out. I said, I'll go. I don't care where it's at. So we go. So I'm going to end up in Fort Lewis. So with that, I'm not going to walk you through my whole life in Ranger Battalion because you're here to hear about Rio Hato. So I guess with that, we'll start the show. This was a quote that one of the staff sergeants had hanging on his locker, and as I was getting there, he was leaving because he had been picked up by Delta Force. So he was going off to selections. I ran into him several times after that, and I bought his car when he left, and I took his locker, and this was hanging in there, and I kept it with me all through my time in battalion, and later, my 27 years with Seattle Police, and hung at my detective desk. And it's that, I mean, you can read it there. It's not a very flowery saying, but it's it kind of put in my mind that sometimes you have to dig down, and you've got to dig out parts of you that you may not want everyone to see. Sometimes you have to be that to get through life, to get through all kinds of things. And I think it suited me well, and it got me through a lot of rough moments. Okay, somebody doing that, or? Oh, got it? Okay. Next. There you are.
Let's do it.
That was good.
There you go.
Well,
There we go.
there's a young me on a first walking out. Actually, I got my notes here. I should just go off of these. This was me heading on one of my first leaves. In the Rangers, you don't get to pick when you want to go home. They tell you when you go home. You are on Ranger readiness always, 1, 2, or 3. 1 means that within, blink of an eye, you have to get all your gear, get ready, get loaded up on a plane, and go anywhere in the world. Number 2 is you're kind of halfway there and halfway that. And number 3 is when you get to just do a lot of in-barrack stuff and go to ranges and train. And that during Ranger Readiness 3 is when you get to go on your leaves. And everybody in the battalion goes on leave at the same time. So everyone's together always. This was one of my first leaves. I'm about, 30 years old there. Yeah.
Look at those fine accommodations.
Yeah, beautiful. That might have been the hotel I checked into. That's all I could afford. $830 a month. Okay. There is, that is me in my room at the barracks. When I first got there, we were issued jungle fatigues, the Vietnam era OD green jungle fatigues, and they took them away from us because during the Bush administration, they felt that they did not want special forces and Rangers to look different. They wanted us all to be the same. So they took our OD greens away and gave us these. This was the first day. Put them on and model them for yourself every day. And I must have been going on post because I've got my spits on. So you had to have those on to go on post. Another thing, unlike today, you see guys in airports, military guys, and they're in their fatigues. We were not allowed. That was a big no-no. If you went off base in these, you might as well pack your crap and stay off. When we left base, you were either in your civilian's clothes or you were in my Class A. That was it. When I flew home on leave, I was in this. Okay. There's me with the hog, the M60. In my room, breakfast of champions. This chair came out of a dumpster. I'm actually very proud of that. It stayed with me my whole 4 years, and I carried that 2 miles on my back to the room. I don't know if you could see these. In 2nd Battalion, they issued these bedspreads to us, which we call Jesus robes, because they take the robes. And I still got mine at home here in Lockport. But that's me with my M60, probably right after cleaning it. That's a shot. Yeah, you can just skip that one.
Come on, the guns.
I was posing. I had just